Hi guys, welcome back to Coral Talks. This is Caroline, your host. Another weekend, another episode. I recorded an episode with a special guest on Tuesday, and I was going to edit it on this Friday, but I realized that the audio on our recording was not working. There was no audio, and at first I thought it was my phone that was broken or like my computer that was broken, but turns out I just the recording just didn't get the audio. So it's just me, myself, and I again. I guess it's just me keeping the suspense high, Gotta wait until one day it finally comes, right? Yeah. Um, Okay, so let's get started. Joke of the day today. Why did the fishermen start doing drugs? Because of peer pressure. Guys, peer pressure is real. Peer pressure is, you would say that it's like not scary, but it's scary. It could get you doing things. Anyway, today I thought of doing a featured species. It's going to be humpback whales. So they are so big. I've never got to see one before, but I would love to. There are 3 separate populations of humpback whales, each in different regions of the ocean. The North Pacific, which is Alaska, Hawaiian Islands, West Coast, British Columbia area, and then there's Central North Pacific Ocean region, which is kind of close to North Pacific because it's just the Pacific Ocean, but it's closer to where Australia, New Zealand, the Marshall Islands are. Then there is the North Atlantic Ocean, which is the west side of Europe, Africa, and the east coast of the US. Humpback whales get their names literally from their hump on the back. Big-winged is what their scientific name means, and their scientific name is Megaptera. So have you ever wondered what the little bumps are on the whales when they jump out of the ocean? Yes, I have, Carol. What are those? Is it just acne? Okay, well, thank you for the response, audience. Yes, it's not acne actually. It's a thing called tubercles. They like when you see a whale, they look these little bubble-like white things. They look small from afar, but each one of those bubble-looking things are actually the size of our fist, and they're hairy too. So they're hairy and large and in charge. These tubercles help them feel vibrations in the water. It kind of helps the whales picture the environment that they're in and what's around them. The tubercles on their fins, though, are used differently. They are used to help the whale guide through the water and reduce drag so that they don't get tired too easily. Speaking of guiding through the water, whales are very, very powerful swimmers. They have massive tails, which are called flukes, and it helps them propel through the water and sometimes even out of the water. And that's where you see them on whale watching tours, A fun fact about them is that they are viral singers and songwriters. So male humpback whales actually make sounds that are considered as songs, and they spread throughout the ocean through the different regions that I was talking about, through each male whale, making connections and one big song. So it goes like this. One male makes one sound that they want of a theme. That sound get passed on to another male whale in the region. Then they use that sound from before and add something of his own, add another sound of his own. So it's like a game of harmonic telephone, basically. And this just goes on and on and on until every whale makes their own sound and makes the sound from each whale before. And once it does that, it doesn't just stop within the region. Like, the song continues. The song gets transmitted to whales in the other regions of the world, and eventually after the three big populations, basically, there's one big song among each of the male whales. These songs that they eventually create are known as their long and haunting sounds. I wish I could insert a clip. Actually, let me see if I can insert a clip of their songs. It's produced by males, like I mentioned earlier, and it's usually during the breeding season. So it's like just this ritual that they have during breeding season. Another thing about humpback whales is that they hunt in groups for their food. Well, first, let me tell you what they eat. They are omnivores and they eat krill, small fish, shrimp, just whatever they can find. Sometimes they eat the plants in the ocean too. They hunt in groups using a technique called bubble net feeding. It's this group of whales that form a circle underwater and they start blowing bubbles in a spiral pattern, like a ritual, if you will, imagine. And the bubbles create a certain wave that disorients and traps whatever prey that they want, which eventually forces the prey up into the surface. Then the whales, as a group, lunge up and break their bubble net that they were creating to eat the prey. And they do this technique when they are reserving their warmth, which is reserving their blubber, as whales have blubber, to prepare for the winter. They can eat and save and reserve up to 3,000 pounds of food per day during the summertime. Bubble netting comes with an individual role for each member within the group. Some whales act as trumpeters, which is like gathering the prey into a group first, and then others act as like herders to bring them closer. So it's like they all make this bubble circle. They all blow bubbles in the spiral pattern, but then some of them first they lure the fish over, and some of them keep them in a nice little circle, and then they start. A lot of the bubble net feedings happen in Alaska or off the coast of Mozambique, South or East Africa, around those areas. And speaking of specific regions, I know I mentioned regions a little bit earlier and I'm all over the place, but I just was reminded that I didn't mention this at all. Humpback whales do migrate as the season changes. During the breeding season, they like to breed around Alaska and the Hawaiian Islands. For us, for the Pacific region humpback whales, as the weather goes colder, they migrate to other parts of the Pacific Ocean. And sometimes I think humpback whales are very ritualistic. They have their ways of living, they're so mighty, and they can sustain so much life on them, which I did not get into this time, but they can sustain so much life on them. They have their own way of living. They can be in groups or they can be individual, and they're so themselves, and I love that about them. Alright, that was a little bit long, a little bit more information for my featured species, but I was scrolling on TikTok and the I Just Want to Be Part of Your Symphony song kept on going, and you know the picture, the sound is like a whale jumping out of the ocean, and I was like, hey, let's talk about humpback whales. But yeah, humpback whales are so cool, and I came across so many other things that I could talk about for humpback whales, but we are going to move on. Today we're going to talk about fishing. So October is National Seafood Month, and although it's almost November, we still have 4 more days. There's still Halloween. I'm very excited for that. Now, all the seafood we eat of comes from the hard work of fishermen and fisheries. So first of all, thank you, fishermen, for all your hard work in providing us the seafood. And second, I thought we could talk about the good and bad fishing methods. Specifically, I wanted to talk about long line fishing and some other good ways of, not necessarily good, but more efficient and safer ways of fishing. No one asked this question. This is me. I wanted to know this. Yeah, I'm not featuring anybody's question this week. Fishing is not only for commerce, it's recreational too. Going out to fish on a weekend or traveling to go fishing can be bonding time for family, relaxing, finding pleasure, rejuvenating yourself, many things. But we have to be considerate still of the species we fish because they're alive and they're part of a very big biodiversity. And we could harm them if we're not careful, if we're inconsiderate. So today for the second section, I wanted, like I said earlier, wanted to talk about long line fishing and what it is and some other more helpful, safe ways of fishing. Long line fishing is a fishing technique that uses baited hooks from a single long line. It's basically this long main line that can go as long as 28 miles with bait hanging down at each interval, each section of the line, and it trails behind a boat as the boat runs. It attracts fish, and fish will come up to it and eat it, and they'll catch the fish that they want. This kind of fishing method is used specifically to catch fish that live in deeper water because as imagination goes, like the line goes above the water and it drops down to mid area level, and then there's the line of hooks and bait that drop down even lower so it can reach the area of deeper fish. It's used to catch fish that live in deeper waters like abercroll, yellowfin, big-eye tuna. A lot of this method is used both commercially and recreationally. The purpose for this type of fishing is so that fishers can get more of a targeted capture of what they want. Fishermen can pick what kind of hook bait and all the other things that go along with getting the right catch to specialize. The long line fishing line doesn't touch the seabed, which is wonderful as it doesn't disrupt the bottom, but it has some harmful effects amidst their efforts of trying to be, all target, discreet, spy, mysterious, and specific. So whoever invented this, your plan is kind of backfiring a little bit. Yeah. So longline fishing contributes to overfished populations, like I was mentioning tuna, because a lot of tuna is captured this way. So mass numbers of tuna get fished this way, and it's overfished. A lot of these times, the remnants of the long lines are littered in the ocean, which is obviously not too great. And sometimes it also kills other species that were not intended to be caught, like endangered leatherback and green sea turtles, or fishes, sharks, because they often get attracted to the dangling hooks and bait, as I would too if I was living in the water, and they would go, check it out. Then they would run the risk of injury, eating, swallowing the hook. Not only for the species who live inside the water, though. Oftentimes, diving birds, which like to dive in the water to get fish for their food, they oftentimes get injured too because they see something lurking over there and they mistake it for food, and they dive in to see what the tea is, and it doesn't turn out so good. Often they drown and they get injured. They get trapped. all goes downhill. As you can see, there are quite some harmful things that can come along with longline fishing. Although it may be specific, one could argue that because it targets a specific species, it won't hurt other species, but I guess just the way that it's set up, just this long line, and sometimes people's little bit of inconsistency could cause it to be not so good because of the trash and of the attraction of other species. And I get it because the lines are so long, they're about 28 miles or something like that long. And so if I was a fish swimming along, if I was a turtle living in the water and I see this consistent long line of just free food, I would be so interested. I would definitely go up there. I think it's a lot of also the type of hooks they use, because once you're there, you're trapped and you can't get out of it. It's just like a painful torture death. So how can longline fishing be less harmful? Fish vessels, which are just fishermen and their specialized fishing boats, can set up to be more efficient and preventative with their measures. Like I was saying, their materials, the way that they use their materials, just all that execution business can be an effort to make it less harmful. And scientists somewhere, Australia I think, studied it and proved that it was quite helpful. So a few of these things are that the fish vessels could set up their hook at night so that they attract less of the other species. This one depends on whether what they're trying to catch is active at night. It really depends on the species. And second is using nylon leaders instead of wire leaders because it's less harmful. A leader is basically a trace or something that goes along the long main line through the hooks that makes the hook sturdy and secures the fish once it's caught onto the line. In this case, when the species accidentally get caught by the line, like sharks, they can use the shark teeth, if it was nylon, to bite away the nylon and escape to safety. If it were the steel metal wire leaders, they wouldn't be able to do that because it's just basically stuck in their mouth and it's really painful and it's really tight. So by the time that the line is hooked up into the surface of the boat, they would have gone through injuries, they would have been dragged along that long line, and they half of the time probably would have ended up dead. And third is using circle hooks. So the hook is the part where you attach the bait to, if I'm not mistaken. And there are different types of hooks that you could use. That some of these hooks are more dangerous for the species. It all depends on the shape. So circle hooks just look more like a circle. They're more round, and the actual Sharpie hook thing is towards like the inside. There's other hooks like the J hook, which looks like a J, and a Japanese hook, which is like a spear / J hook. These other types of hooks that are more common among fishing businesses and fishing people are more easy to get lodged into a fish's mouth, a shark's mouth, a turtle's mouth. These hooks make it hard for them to escape and have a lot of injuries because it gets stuck into their jaw. So using a circle hook would actually be better for the turtles, for the sharks, and the other fish that get accidentally attracted, because they could find their way to escape to safety without having these lodged hooks in their jaw and or being stuck because their jaw is lodged within that J hook. One might ask if it's easier to escape, then the fish that they actually want to capture would also escape. But in Australia, they said that despite having these less harmful hooks, they were still able to successfully catch the fish. I know a lot of these things, I'm just here saying it and it sounds very easy, but it's a lot to do those things, to switch up the materials that they use, like, oh, just switch the equipment out. But there's a lot that goes into making these switches and making these more beneficial switches, which is why a lot of fish vessels around the world don't really end up making their long lines less harmful. It's causing an effect on the biodiversity because, according to scientists, 70% of other unrelated species have decreased where there is longline fishing, which is kind of sad. And a fun fact, something a little bit more positive, longline fishing in the Pacific Ocean is banned for United States vessels, and longline fishing for tuna was banned in the Maldives ever since 2019. Because they weren't really being so efficient with their ways to use longline fishing. California has their, which I guess is part of the Pacific Ocean ban, is doing this to protect the endangered green turtles, which is very wholesome. So yay! Now you might be wondering, if not longline fishing, what am I supposed to use for fishing? Well, for both commercial and recreational fishing, there are other types of fishing like pole and line fishing or gill net fishing. Pole and line fishing is basically just catching fish one at a time. I understand it might take a long time, but it can be used to catch big fish like tuna or other big fish as well, not just tuna. It doesn't touch the seafloor, which is great, and it is less harmful because it's not attracting other species. Then there's gill net fishing, which uses a wall or a curtain of netting that hangs midway in the water. It's kind of like the scene in Finding Dory, where it's just this big net that like starts closing up and all these fish just gather in there and they start getting taken up. And it sounds very cool. Actually, it's lower in environmental impacts because it just floats mid-water. It doesn't touch the seabed, and less fish are harmed in the way because they're essentially just captured. I would imagine that if fishermen catch other etc. fish, they would release it in the ocean, just take what they need. So that wouldn't have much of an effect, life or death wise, for the fish and for other species. Using gill net fishing also fits the criteria of, mass fishing, which a lot of fisheries need for our commerce, for our seafood. Now, of course, there are better alternatives. These are some better alternatives to compared to improperly managed longline fishing. Of course, one could probably find their disadvantages too. From what I looked up, it's better. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. And of course, there are some other things recreational fishers can do to fish safely and healthier for the environment. And those are just to not litter your fishing materials, obviously, and following local rules around the area, making sure that you catch and release if you're not actually catching them for use, or making sure that you are catching what you're allowed to catch. And yeah, that pretty much wraps up today's episode. I think I need to work on my transitions. I write down points beforehand of what I want to say. I just get into each of these without a smooth transition. And I'm not sure for the listener, it's just like very abrupt. Because I feel like if I was listening, it would be abrupt. So I'm going to work on my transitions. And yeah, I feel like that's all for today's episode. And thank you very much for listening to me again. To only me again. Hopefully I can get it figured out with my special guest and make the audio work. Please keep your eyes peeled if there's a special guest next week. Maybe it's just gonna be me. Maybe there's a special guest. You never know. It's a surprise. Life is a box of chocolates. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you have a slay, restful, and productive day or night or midday or whatever you're doing right now. And love you all very much. See you next time.